At first glance, the P-47 Thunderbolt was considered nothing more than a slow, cumbersome mess that was completely outclassed by its competitors. But what if I told you this useless aircraft became one of the most feared planes of World War II? It wasn't supposed to work, yet it did, in ways no one expected. And German pilots? They hated it. But why? When the P-47 first took to the skies, it was met with skepticism on both sides of the war. Allied pilots saw it as an oversized, underperforming fighter, and Axis forces couldn't believe how much they were seeing it in combat. Despite its massive build, it didn't seem to have the speed or maneuverability to hang with the P-51 Mustang, which was quickly gaining recognition as the superior fighter. The Thunderbolt, with its large radial engine and bulky frame, was a far cry from the sleek, agile aircraft that dominated aerial dogfights. Early reactions from pilots were less than positive, and many predicted that it would never be able to hold its own in real combat situations. In fact, the P-47 was often criticized for being too slow, too heavy, and simply too hard to maneuver. Its weight made it sluggish in the skies, and its thick armor, designed to protect the pilot, was seen as a liability rather than an asset. How could a plane that couldn't outmaneuver the enemy possibly succeed in a dogfight? Allied forces had their doubts, and so did the Germans. Many believed it was just another failed experiment in aviation, destined to be replaced by more advanced designs. But this is where things took a shocking turn. Despite being written off as useless, the P-47 was about to prove its doubters wrong in the most unexpected way possible. It wasn't its agility or speed that made it stand out. No, the Thunderbolt had something else that no one saw coming. And the Germans, who once dismissed it as an easy target, were about to learn to fear it. But what was it about this aircraft that made it such a force in combat? Was it the unexpected toughness it exhibited in battle, or was there something else that made it a nightmare for Axis pilots? Stick around, because this story is far from over. And you'll soon understand why the P-47 became a pivotal part of the Allies' war strategy, and why German pilots came to absolutely despise it. When the P-47 Thunderbolt first entered service, it was an easy target for mockery. From the moment it took off, critics questioned how such a large, bulky plane could ever compete with the more nimble fighters in the skies. It had the power of a massive engine, but it lacked the agility that was key to survival in dogfights. Pilots quickly discovered that it was far from the ideal dogfighter. Unlike the sleek P-51 Mustang, the Thunderbolt was heavy, with a large frame that made it difficult to maneuver quickly in tight turns. While its speed wasn't terrible, it was still no match for the faster, more agile planes it would face in combat. Pilots on both sides of the war struggled to understand the Thunderbolt's place in the skies. In its early years, it was primarily seen as a mistake. Even American pilots often preferred other fighters that could outmaneuver the enemy, such as the P-51 Mustang or the faster, lighter Spitfire. The Thunderbolt's design, with its thick, radial engine and a fuselage that seemed unnecessarily bulky, made it feel more like a tank than a fighter plane. It wasn't the kind of aircraft that would be winning any beauty contests, nor did it seem like the ideal choice for fast-paced air combat. The weight was a significant problem. Its heavy structure made climbs slow, and its sluggishness in the air led many to believe that it was outclassed before it had even entered the fray. To make matters worse, its large engine made the P-47 a less-than-ideal choice for long-range operations. Pilots questioned whether it could handle the rigors of sustained combat without being overshadowed by lighter, more agile aircraft. For many, it seemed like just another failed design, not built for the kind of high-speed, close-quarters dogfights that defined the war in the skies. But as the war continued, something unexpected started to happen. While the P-47's inability to engage in tight dogfights seemed like a major disadvantage, its sheer size and power began to reveal an unexpected strength. The plane was tougher than any of its competitors. It could withstand hits from enemy fire, and its heavy armor provided unparalleled protection for its pilot. It was a fighter that didn't rely on speed or agility to win. Instead, It was built to absorb punishment and still come out swinging. It was becoming clear that the Thunderbolt wasn't a fighter in the traditional sense. It was something entirely different. A bomber's best friend, capable of taking on ground targets with ferocity. But no one saw that coming in the early days. In fact, most thought its size would be its downfall. So, what happened next to change everyone's mind about the P-47? How did this so-called cumbersome fighter evolve into a key weapon of war, especially in the face of German pilots who couldn't help but dread seeing it in the skies? The story is just beginning. But what we'll uncover next might be the most surprising part of the P-47's transformation. Hold on tight, because this plane was far from the failure it was once believed to be. Despite its size and lack of agility, the P-47 Thunderbolt had one surprising characteristic that quickly turned it into a force to be reckoned with: its endurance. While German pilots expected this bulky fighter to be easy pickings in combat, they soon found out that the P-47 had an uncanny ability to absorb damage and keep flying. This unexpected durability became one of its defining features and a key reason why it earned the respect and hatred of enemy pilots. The P-47 was built like a tank. Its thick, armored fuselage could withstand the kind of punishment that would have torn other aircraft apart. German pilots quickly learned that shooting down a Thunderbolt wasn't as easy as targeting a more nimble, lightly armored plane. The Thunderbolt could take bullet after bullet, sometimes even with significant damage to its wings or tail, and still make it back to base. For a fighter plane that wasn't designed with agility in mind, its ability to survive the brutal conditions of combat shocked both its allies and its enemies. There are countless stories of P-47 pilots returning to base with their aircraft riddled with bullet holes, sometimes even with entire sections of their wings or fuselage completely shot away. Yet, these planes would often land safely, with their pilots walking away unharmed. It wasn't uncommon for a P-47 to take hits from enemy fire and continue flying, thanks to its sturdy design. While other fighters would have been forced to retreat or crash, the Thunderbolt's ability to withstand severe damage gave it a distinct advantage in battle. One of the most famous examples of the P-47's survivalist traits comes from the story of pilot Francis Gabreski, one of the most successful American fighter aces. Gabreski's P-47 was struck by enemy fire while on a mission, and despite suffering heavy damage, he managed to fly it back to Allied-controlled territory. His aircraft had holes the size of baseballs in the fuselage, but it stayed airborne. This was a pattern that repeated itself. With P-47 pilots, they came to trust the Thunderbolt's resilience in ways that no other fighter could match. But it wasn't just about taking damage and staying in the air. It was about the confidence that came with knowing your plane could survive almost anything. For American pilots, the P-47 wasn't just a tool for combat, it was a reliable partner. They could go into battle knowing that, no matter what, their Thunderbolt had their back. This belief became ingrained in their strategy, making them more aggressive and fearless in their attacks. From the German perspective, however, the Thunderbolt's durability was a nightmare. Initially, they thought the P-47 would be a simple target, an easy kill in a dogfight. But as they quickly discovered, a shot-up P-47 often wasn't out of the fight. Its rugged design meant that even if it was damaged, it could still engage and deal devastating blows. It was a psychological blow to German pilots, who came to realize that no matter how much damage they inflicted, the P-47 could keep coming back. The Thunderbolt's durability wasn't just a physical attribute, it had a psychological impact on its enemies as well. For German pilots, facing a P-47 was a constant reminder that the Allies had a fighter that couldn't be easily defeated. And that frustration would only grow as they encountered more and more Thunderbolts in the skies. The P-47 wasn't just surviving, it was thriving in combat situations that should have been its undoing. But this toughness wasn't all the P-47 had to offer. What would shock the Germans even more was that the Thunderbolt's ruggedness wasn't just limited to surviving hits. It was also incredibly effective in ground attacks. While its resilience in the air made it a tough opponent, it turned out that the P-47's true strength lay in its ability to provide crucial support on the ground. Stay tuned, because next we're diving into the Thunderbolt's role as an unstoppable ground attacker. You won't believe how it became a terror for the enemy, not just in the sky, but on the ground as well. As the war progressed, the P-47 Thunderbolt began to reveal its true strength, but it wasn't the speed or agility that made it a game-changer. No, it was something entirely different: the P-47's ability to excel as a fighter bomber. In a surprising twist, the Thunderbolt became one of the most effective aircraft for ground attacks, a role it wasn't even originally designed for. At first, the P-47 was built as a long-range escort fighter, intended to protect bombers during raids deep into enemy territory. However, as the war dragged on and the needs of the Allies evolved, the Thunderbolt was given new tasks that were far more dangerous and far-reaching than anyone had imagined. With its rugged design and heavy armor, it quickly became an ideal platform for attacking ground targets. This was a significant turning point in the Thunderbolt's career, no longer just a clunky fighter struggling to hold its own in the skies. The P-47 became a terrifyingly effective ground attack aircraft. The Thunderbolt's durability made it perfect for the role. Its thick armor allowed it to fly low and slow, dive bombing enemy positions, convoys, and even tanks, without worrying about the kind of damage that would have sent lighter aircraft back to base. The P-47's rugged frame meant that it could survive the harsh conditions of low-altitude strikes, where other planes would be at risk of being torn apart by enemy fire. German forces quickly learned that if they saw a Thunderbolt dive toward them, it wasn't just a fighter coming in for a quick pass, it was a bomber that could deal serious damage and keep going. One of the most famous examples of the Thunderbolt's effectiveness in this role comes from the Normandy invasion. P-47 seconds were used extensively in the D-Day assault, providing close air support for ground troops. Their primary mission was to disrupt enemy defenses by attacking key targets like gun emplacements, supply lines, and troop concentrations. With its powerful engine and ability to carry a significant payload of bombs, the P-47 became an indispensable weapon for the Allies. Pilots would dive in, drop bombs on their targets, and then pull out, often under heavy fire, without losing their composure. The sheer resilience of the Thunderbolt allowed pilots to return time and time again to hit enemy forces where it hurt. The ground attack role also played into the Thunderbolt's psychological impact on the enemy. Imagine being a German soldier on the ground, watching a massive P-47 barrel toward you, its engines roaring as it drops bombs and strafes your position. The plane wasn't just big, it was a constant presence, looming overhead and wreaking havoc on anything it targeted. This wasn't the type of fighter plane you could outrun or outmaneuver. It was a blunt instrument of destruction, and it was relentless. What made the Thunderbolt even more terrifying for the Germans was that it wasn't just a single bomb drop and then gone. The P-47 could take damage, return to base, rearm, and go right back into the fray. This made it a weapon of sheer endurance. While lighter fighters would need to refuel or retreat after taking hits, the Thunderbolt could keep delivering devastating attacks long after other planes would be grounded. The surprising part about all of this was that no one expected the P-47 to be so effective at ground attacks. In its early days, it was seen as a poor dogfighter that couldn't stand up to the more agile planes. But it was in these ground attack missions that the Thunderbolt truly showed its worth, turning what was once a slow, cumbersome aircraft into a high-impact tool for devastating enemy infrastructure. But the P-47's transformation into an unstoppable ground attacker didn't go unnoticed. German pilots, already frustrated by its durability, began to dread seeing these heavy, powerful planes in the skies. The Thunderbolt was no longer just an oversized fighter. It had become a versatile weapon that could strike from the skies and make life miserable for the enemy below. And that wasn't even the full extent of what made the P-47 so feared. The story was far from over. There was still one more element of its design that made it a nightmare for German pilots in ways they hadn't anticipated. What came next would shock them even more. While the P-47 Thunderbolt's durability and success as a ground attack aircraft made it a formidable force, it was the way the plane changed the rules of engagement in the air that truly made it hated by German pilots. On paper, it shouldn't have been a threat. It was big, heavy, and slow, especially compared to the nimble fighters that dominated aerial combat. But in practice, the P-47 turned out to be far more dangerous than anyone expected. It used its sheer size and power in ways that left its enemies struggling to keep up. German pilots, especially those in the Luftwaffe, were trained to rely on speed, maneuverability, and precision. In aerial combat, the advantage went to the lighter, faster planes that could outmaneuver opponents with ease. The P-47, however, did not play by these rules. While it lacked the agility to perform sharp, high-speed maneuvers in dogfights, the Thunderbolt excelled in hit-and-run tactics that caught German pilots off guard. The sheer size of the P-47, often seen as a disadvantage, became its greatest strength. It wasn't a fighter plane that had to engage in constant aerial acrobatics to win. Instead, it could approach a combat situation with brute force. The Thunderbolt's massive firepower made it capable of dealing devastating damage in a single pass. Once it engaged, it didn't have to rely on intricate maneuvers to stay in the fight. The Thunderbolt could simply take a few hits, absorb the punishment, and return the favor with its heavy armament. For the Germans, facing the P-47 was like confronting a juggernaut that couldn't be easily outflanked. While other Allied aircraft relied on speed and quick, sharp turns to evade the enemy, the P-47 instead used its endurance to outlast its opponents in battle. A German pilot who tried to outmaneuver a P-47 would often find himself facing a well-armored plane that wouldn't break off the fight no matter how much damage it took. The Thunderbolt's power and durability also played into the psychological aspect of combat. Imagine flying a German fighter and locking onto a P-47, thinking it's an easy target. You dive in for the kill, only to realize that it won't break. You hit it with several rounds, and yet it keeps coming, firing back relentlessly. That psychological tension, knowing the P-47 could take whatever you threw at it and still continue the fight, became a significant stressor for German pilots. In fact, the P-47's ability to soak up hits and still keep fighting often led to German pilots misjudging their attacks. In a high-speed chase or a dogfight, a German pilot would typically rely on hitting a target just once or twice to bring it down. But with the Thunderbolt, that strategy didn't work. The P-47 could take hits that would cripple other fighters, but it still had enough in the tank to chase, engage, and destroy the enemy. This ability to absorb hits, combined with the firepower it carried, made the P-47 a terrifying opponent. What's even more surprising is that the Thunderbolt wasn't just tough, it was also an expert at long-range engagements. Unlike the P-51 Mustang, which had an edge in high-speed dogfighting, the P-47 could strike from afar, using its powerful armament to target enemy bombers, ground installations, and even other fighters before they ever got close enough to react. This made it not just a presence in the air, but a constant threat to German operations on multiple fronts. While the P-47 was often seen as slow and cumbersome by those unfamiliar with its tactics, it was exactly this misunderstanding of the aircraft's capabilities that made it such a dangerous adversary for the Germans. The Thunderbolt was a heavy hitter, capable of dishing out damage while absorbing whatever the enemy could throw at it. The Germans came to fear the Thunderbolt because they quickly realized they couldn't rely on their typical strategies to deal with it. But it wasn't just the P-47's power and toughness that made it hated by German pilots. It was also its relentlessness. Unlike the sleek, fast planes that could easily retreat if things went wrong, the Thunderbolt didn't shy away from a fight. It would return time and time again, relentlessly pursuing its targets. This kind of sustained pressure was something the Germans weren't prepared for, and this tactical shift in how the Thunderbolt engaged its enemies made it an even more formidable force in the skies. But even with all these advantages, the story of the P-47's rise to prominence didn't end there. Its impact in the skies wasn't just about how it survived or fought. There was another key part of its success that would shake the Luftwaffe to its core. And that's where we're headed next. One of the most striking features of the P-47 Thunderbolt wasn't just its ability to survive the harshest conditions, it was the pilot's belief that no matter what, their plane would get them back home. The P-47 became a symbol of survival, offering pilots the kind of confidence and assurance that other fighters just couldn't match. While other planes would falter under heavy fire or break apart in the face of enemy resistance, the Thunderbolt's endurance allowed its pilots to push the envelope in ways that would have been impossible in a less durable aircraft. For American pilots flying the P-47, the ruggedness of their aircraft didn't just offer physical protection, it gave them a psychological edge. They knew that if things went wrong, their Thunderbolt could take the hits and keep flying. This became critical during the intense aerial battles over Europe, where the stakes were high and the pressure was relentless. Pilots who flew the P-47 knew that, even if they found themselves in a tight spot, they had a fighter that could absorb damage and still get them back to base. One of the most remarkable stories of this survival instinct comes from the legendary American ace Francis Gabreski. On one particularly harrowing mission, Gabreski's P-47 was hit by enemy fire and severely damaged. His aircraft had bullet holes through the wings, fuselage, and even the tail. But instead of retreating, Gabreski pressed on, shooting down an enemy fighter before making a successful landing back at base. The resilience of his Thunderbolt was the difference between life and death. Without it, Gabreski might have been forced to bail out, or worse, crash behind enemy lines. This kind of story wasn't rare. Throughout the war, P-47 pilots found themselves in situations where their planes took heavy damage, only to return home against all odds. These pilots became known for their fearlessness, not just because of their skills, but because of their trust in the Thunderbolt's ability to keep them alive. They flew into dangerous situations with the confidence that, even if they were hit, they wouldn't be going down anytime soon. For the Germans, however, these survival stories were a source of frustration. Initially, they believed that their fighters could quickly destroy the P-47 with ease, but the more they encountered it, the more they realized that destroying it was no easy task. The Thunderbolt's armor was one thing, but its ability to keep flying after sustaining significant damage was another. This was an aircraft that didn't know how to quit. It wasn't just surviving, it was fighting back, often making life more difficult for German pilots than they had anticipated. As the P-47 proved itself in combat, pilots became more daring, knowing they had a plane that would give them multiple chances to complete their mission, even if the odds were against them. This sense of unshakable resilience led to a shift in strategy. The pilots of the Thunderbolt weren't afraid to engage in intense dogfights or head straight into enemy territory. They trusted their aircraft to get them through whatever came their way. The very fact that they could survive damage and still achieve their objectives made the P-47 a psychological weapon as much as a physical one. But it wasn't just about surviving, it was about thriving. The P-47 gave pilots the ability to complete their missions even after their aircraft had been compromised. This level of endurance was unmatched by any other fighter in the skies at the time, and it left German pilots frustrated, knowing that the P-47 would often return to the fight no matter how many times it was shot down. This never say die attitude and the legendary survival stories of the P-47 pilots were shared across the ranks, and they only added to the aircraft's growing mystique. Soon, the Thunderbolt became more than just a plane. It became a symbol of hope and determination for the Allied forces. But the P-47's ability to endure wasn't just limited to its survival stories in the air. The psychological effect on the German forces would soon make them rethink their entire approach to the war. As the Thunderbolt's reputation spread, it became clear that no matter what the Germans threw at it, the P-47 had one final trick up its sleeve, and it would leave them scrambling to adapt. Stay tuned because, next, we're going to explore how the German pilots finally came to respect and ultimately fear the P-47. It wasn't just its durability that turned the tide, it was its reputation, and that was something no one could ignore. As the war wore on, the P-47 Thunderbolt began to shift from being viewed as an unwieldy, useless aircraft to one of the most respected and feared fighters in the sky. The transformation wasn't just in its physical capabilities, but in the way it was understood by both Allied and Axis forces. What once seemed like a slow, cumbersome machine became the cornerstone of many successful air campaigns. At first, American pilots were unsure about the Thunderbolt's capabilities. It had the reputation of being more of a tank than a true fighter, and many questioned whether it was up to the task of escorting bombers over enemy territory, let alone taking on the Luftwaffe in direct combat. However, as more missions were flown, it became clear that the P-47's unique design made it perfect for specific roles, namely, long-range escorting and ground attack operations. While it wasn't as agile as the P-51 Mustang or as fast as other Allied fighters, its strength and durability made it an invaluable asset in situations where other planes would have been vulnerable. The breakthrough moment came when pilots started to appreciate the P-47's toughness in combat. As stories of P-47 seconds taking on multiple enemies and returning to base with significant damage spread, the Thunderbolt gained a reputation for being able to take a punch and keep fighting. The more pilots trusted the P-47's durability and its firepower, the more they pushed it to its limits. And it paid off. While the Thunderbolt had once been criticized for its lack of maneuverability, the shifting perception now had pilots seeing it in a new light. They weren't using it for dogfights as much anymore. Instead, it was proving to be a master of long-range operations and ground support, roles that allowed its raw firepower and durability to shine. In these operations, the Thunderbolt wasn't expected to make quick turns or evasions. Its job was to dive in, strike hard, and return to base, no matter how much damage it sustained along the way. German pilots, however, had a different view of the Thunderbolt's rise in prominence. Early on, they dismissed the P-47 as slow and inefficient, but soon they were forced to acknowledge that this so-called useless plane was far from harmless. With its heavy armor, potent weaponry, and remarkable survival abilities, the Thunderbolt began to represent something that German pilots dreaded most, an opponent that would not go down easily, no matter how much punishment it took. As more encounters with the P-47 took place, German pilots began to realize they couldn't rely on their usual tactics to outmaneuver or destroy it. The P-47 didn't give up. It didn't retreat after taking a few hits. It pressed on, delivering devastating strikes, even when other aircraft would have been forced to return to base. The durability and relentless nature of the P-47 made it a difficult target, and German pilots were left with no choice but to respect its capabilities. This shift in perception was not just about the P-47's ability to survive. It was about its consistent presence in the skies. The Thunderbolt wasn't just a threat in the short term, it was a long-term problem for the Luftwaffe. Every time a Thunderbolt came back from a mission, no matter how damaged, it was a reminder that the Allies had a weapon that was difficult to defeat. The Germans learned to fear the Thunderbolt's returning presence, knowing that it would always be there, taking part in one mission after another, delivering ground strikes and escorting bombers without ever seeming to slow down. What began as a useless plane had, over time, become a symbol of endurance and power. The P-47 was no longer the fighter that couldn't hang in a dogfight. It was the aircraft that would outlast its enemies and turn the tide in battles that seemed impossible. The change in perception wasn't just about what the P-47 could do in the air. It was about how it became a constant threat, a reliable asset in every Allied mission. This transformation didn't just affect the battlefield, it affected the mental game of war. For the Allies, the P-47 was now a trusted tool that gave them confidence in the skies. For the Germans, it was a constant thorn in their side, reminding them that no matter how many planes they had, the Allies had a fighter that refused to quit. But this new respect for the P-47 wasn't limited to the battlefield. The Thunderbolt's legacy would live on, influencing both the tactics of the war and the designs of future aircraft. As the P-47 earned its place in history, the world would soon realize that this useless fighter was anything but. And in the next section, we'll look at how this once dismissed aircraft left an indelible mark on aviation history, shaping the designs of future planes and changing the course of combat in the skies forever. The P-47 Thunderbolt's impact on World War II cannot be overstated. What started as a cumbersome, unremarkable aircraft, often dismissed as a failed design, ended up leaving a lasting legacy that shaped both the course of the war and the future of aviation. The Thunderbolt's reputation, once marred by its initial design flaws, evolved into one of the most celebrated stories of resilience and versatility in military aviation. First and foremost, the P-47's durability and ground attack capabilities had a profound effect on Allied air strategies. The plane's ability to take damage and continue flying was something that no other fighter at the time could match. Its rugged construction meant that it could withstand enemy fire and return to base, often after sustaining significant damage. This made it a critical asset during the European and Pacific theaters, where long-range missions and close air support were essential to the Allies' success. The Thunderbolt's role in providing escorts for bombers and engaging in ground strikes helped turn the tide in many key battles, from the D-Day invasion to the devastating bombing campaigns over Germany. But the P-47's influence didn't stop with the war. The lessons learned from its survival and versatility had a profound impact on the development of future military aircraft. The Thunderbolt's success proved that there was room for tough, rugged aircraft that could endure damage while still remaining effective in combat. Its heavy armor, which had once been seen as a flaw, became a model for future aircraft designs. The P-47 showed that power, durability, and versatility could be just as important as speed and maneuverability, and these lessons would influence post-war aircraft development for years to come. Moreover, the P-47 set the stage for the evolution of fighter-bomber tactics. Its ability to carry large bombs and strike ground targets effectively showed that aircraft could be used in more than just aerial combat. This idea of a multi-role fighter, one that could carry bombs, provide close air support, and engage in dogfights, became a cornerstone of modern military aviation. The P-47's role in these tactics would pave the way for later aircraft designs, such as the F-4 Phantom and the A-10 Thunderbolt II, which would continue the Thunderbolt's legacy in different ways. Beyond its direct influence on military tactics and aircraft development, the P-47 became a symbol of American ingenuity and determination. The fact that a plane initially deemed useless could evolve into one of the most effective aircraft of the war speaks volumes about the adaptability of both its design and its pilots. The Thunderbolt proved that innovation doesn't always follow a straight path. It often takes unexpected turns, and success comes from adapting and improving along the way. This lesson is one that still resonates in both the military and civilian sectors today. Even more than its technological influence, the P-47's legacy lives on through the countless stories of pilots who survived missions because of their Thunderbolt's toughness and the sheer fear it instilled in the enemy. The P-47 wasn't just another aircraft, it was a trusted companion for the pilots who flew it. Its ability to return them to safety time and time again was a testament to the bond between pilot and plane. A bond that made the Thunderbolt more than just a machine, it was a symbol of resilience and hope. But there's something even deeper about the P-47's legacy. It wasn't just the hardware or the strategies, it was how the Thunderbolt changed perceptions. It took a plane that was considered too big and too slow, and showed that the rules of warfare were not set in stone. The P-47's success proved that anything could be turned around with the right design and the right attitude. The story of the Thunderbolt is a powerful reminder that what might initially seem like a weakness can become a strength, and that innovation often comes from the most unexpected places. The legacy of the P-47 is alive today, not just in the form of museums and history books, but in the principles that continue to guide aircraft design and combat tactics. The Thunderbolt remains one of the most iconic aircraft of World War II, remembered not for its failures, but for its unexpected success against the odds. It wasn't just a tool of war. It became a lasting testament to the power of persistence, adaptability, and sheer force of will. And as we look to the future of military aviation, it's clear that the spirit of the P-47, uncompromising, resilient, and fearless, will continue to inspire the aircraft and pilots of tomorrow. When the P-47 Thunderbolt first rolled off the production line, no one could have predicted the profound impact it would have on the outcome of World War II. Initially dismissed as a useless design, the Thunderbolt not only survived but thrived, earning a reputation that would rival any fighter plane of its time. What was once considered a heavy, slow aircraft became a symbol of unmatched endurance, versatility, and relentless power in the skies. But the real question is, why was it so surprising that the P-47 turned out to be such a success? The answer lies in the Thunderbolt's ability to adapt to the evolving needs of war. The P-47 wasn't designed for quick turns or high-speed dogfights. It was designed to endure, to take hits and keep going. This simple yet powerful feature allowed it to thrive in situations where other aircraft would falter. Its ground attack capabilities, its unbelievable durability, and its ability to outlast enemies in battle made it more than just a fighter. It became an unsung hero, offering support where it was needed most, above the front lines, protecting bombers, and delivering devastating blows to the enemy below. In the early stages of the war, it wasn't just the plane that was underestimated, it was the tactics that would emerge around it. As the Allies realized the full potential of the P-47, they adapted their strategies to maximize its strengths. Pilots, who were initially skeptical of its performance, came to trust the Thunderbolt's ability to endure and fight back, no matter how much damage it sustained. German pilots, who once saw it as an easy target, soon learned that this useless plane would be far from an easy kill. In fact, it was the P-47's psychological impact that may have been one of its most powerful assets. It was a plane that refused to die. And the Thunderbolt's legacy wasn't just about surviving, it was about changing perceptions. The P-47 proved that success in combat didn't rely solely on speed and maneuverability. Sometimes, the key to victory was sheer power, ruggedness, and the ability to adapt to the challenges at hand. The lessons learned from the P-47 service are still felt today, shaping the designs of modern military aircraft and influencing how air combat strategies are approached. Looking back, the P-47 Thunderbolt was never truly useless. It was a fighter that, in its own unique way, proved its worth, time and time again. From being dismissed as a failure to becoming one of the most respected planes in the sky, the Thunderbolt's journey is a reminder of how first impressions can be deceiving, and how even the most unlikely candidates can rise to greatness when given the opportunity to shine. And as we reflect on the Thunderbolt's legacy, it's worth asking, what other aircraft, weapons, or technologies today are being overlooked or underestimated, only to surprise us with their unexpected strengths in the future? The story of the P-47 Thunderbolt reminds us that sometimes the most unexpected heroes come from the most unlikely places.